Thank you all for joining us for the Research Poster Design Workshop. Joining us today are Nicole Thomas, graduate student and graduate research assistant, GPSA secretary, and Dr. Vo, assistant professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning. They will be reviewing strategies to help you present your research in an effective and visually appealing way. I'm going to hand it over to Nicole now to get us started.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen really quickly, and then I can go ahead and get started on our PowerPoint. Okay, so welcome to Research Poster Design. I am Nicole Thomas, and I am here with my advisor today, Dr. Tina Vo. So a bit about our backgrounds. I come from the Department of Teaching and Learning within the College of Education, and Dr. Vo is also within that department. I specifically focus on researching misconceptions in science, and I've been to several conference presentations. I've attended conferences both in undergrad and graduate school. So what we're going to talk to you today about is essentially how to form a appealing and effective research poster. So our overview is research posters are a key method of presenting your research in a concise and condensed manner. So how you create and present your poster affects the ability of your audience to follow along and understand your research design and findings. So today we're going to cover how you present key information in a visually appealing and effective way. We're going to go over organizational patterns and design principles in order to help you present your poster. And we're going to introduce strategies to discuss your work in and out of your field of study, and then how to address any attendee questions when you're actually at the conference and people come up to you and talk to you about your poster. So everyone here, if I could have you do a little exercise for me, if you have either a piece of paper or a sticky note near you, that would be super beneficial. If not, you could probably start like a Word doc on your computer as well. So I'll give everyone just a couple seconds to get that out if you'd like to participate in the exercise. And I'm actually going to do it along with you. Got a little sticky notes. Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so this exercise is going to be about the next topic that you would or would like to present. Fold that paper into 4 quadrants or draw 4 quadrants on your computer or your sticky note, and you will consider the following. So you're going in the first quadrant, your field and your advisor. So what you're going to consider is the type of field that you're in, whether or not there's any specific, like, I guess, requirements of that field. So say you have to include, specific graphs or specific, say like you're in life sciences and you have to include your Western blot. There are specific things that you need to include on your poster for your field, or if your advisor has requested anything specific of you, which is an important consideration to make. So that's going to be your first quadrant, is field/advisor. Your second quadrant is whether or not you will be there. So will you be in person presenting your work, or will you be making a poster, contributing to a project, and then allowing other people to present it on your behalf? That's an important consideration to take in once you're designing your poster, because we'll talk about it later, but basically, will you be present presenting your research, or will you not be? Your third quadrant is going to be your audience. So where you're presenting this, who you're presenting this to, who you're speaking to, who you're speaking with, in consideration of your audience. And then finally, your last quadrant is your goals. So what are your goals with this poster? Is it something that you're presenting on the way to potentially making it into your thesis or dissertation? Is it something that you're presenting to eventually turn into a published paper? Or is it something that you're presenting to get feedback on? Or is it just a small project that you've wrapped up and now you're done with? So in your fourth quadrant, you'll be focusing on your goals. So right now, I'm going to give everyone about 5 minutes to go ahead and write down and fill in those quadrants. So thinking about anything that your advisor has told you to add, thinking about whether or not you will be present at your poster, thinking about who your audience is, and thinking about what your goals are. And then if anyone needs me to like repeat any of those or go back or anything, definitely add it in the chat and then I can talk about it again.
What if we're not sure what is something that is typical in our field to include in a poster?
Dr. Vo, you want to take that one?
Can you repeat that, Jess?
Yeah, for the first quadrant, what if we're not familiar with what is something typical that would be included in a poster in our field?
Ooh, that's a great question. It kind of ties into who your audience is. Think about the conferences you might go to. One of the best ways to get familiar with types of posters is to see if previous large conferences in your area have had online poster submissions, or if they have examples, or what they've done there. So for education, our big conference would be considered AERA, the American Educational Researcher Association. But for my field, if I get more specific rather than just teaching, it's science teaching, and that would be NARS, an organization focused on science, education, and research. So I would Google both of those conferences and see if they have past poster presentations that they put online. You'll start to see patterns arise like within education about how people have structured and created things. You'll also find that some more science-oriented poster sessions actually let you like put your picture in the top corner because the poster sessions are asynchronous. So those are the types of things that you're looking for. If there are QR codes all over the place, you probably expect a QR code. Or if all of the titles are in a very specific position, that might be something that's very field specific.
Yeah, Dr. Vo added a great consideration to the chat. Additional audience considerations. So is it for experts or is it for the community? That's really important in terms of what information you include. Say you're doing a community presentation, you're not going to want to put a lot of jargon from within your field because chances are the attendees who are there won't necessarily be well versed in your field, but it's more so like the community impact of it. Versus presenting to experts who, if everyone already knows, electrical engineering, then you don't have to explain electrical engineering to them. So it definitely depends on who you're presenting to as well. Does anyone need more time on the exercise? Maybe a couple more minutes? Nah, we're good. Okay. Types of goals to include, communication, dissemination of your ideas, and whether or not you want feedback on specific areas. So that's a really fun exercise to get people started in terms of thinking about what you're going to include on your poster. So a lot of times this is useful for when you know that there's a conference or a presentation in mind that you want to do. You don't necessarily know where to start with it. This is a great way to kind of structure what you're going to be including onto your poster. Oops. Okay. So there are two general types of posters to consider. So I'm sure most people have seen the traditional poster. So this is when you go to a conference and it's generally more scientific in terms of being structured like a research proposal. So you have your title, you have your authors, you have your abstract, procedures, methods, as well as your findings. So in this, you can see that it's structured to kind of read through the poster. So you have your title here, your introduction here, your methods right below that, your results in the middle, and then your contributions and next steps down at the bottom right-hand corner. So in order to prepare for writing a traditional poster, you basically start off with these sections of your research. So you go through all of your different sections in terms of introductions, what your methods or plans were, any data you may have collected, any charts you want to include, tables. All of that information is really good to include on a poster because that will allow people to actually visualize the data that you're speaking about. So you don't want to necessarily overwhelm people with just words, and you don't want to read directly off of your poster. You want to be able to have like bite-sized tidbits of information that people can process easily while walking by, while viewing it, and then that way, whatever information that you have that you want to give them, you're able to expand upon. So these examples are specifically pulled from the Yale, I believe it's a Yale poster library. So if you want to see more examples like this in templates as well, definitely click on the link on the bottom. And I believe Dr. Rose added it in the chat as well. So in order to prepare you to write the poster, you have a conference proposal, and then a conference paper, and then an empirical paper. So that's kind of the timeline in terms of turning this poster into an empirical paper. For a design-based poster, that one is a bit different. So this one is actually access or goal or conclusion oriented. So this is a newer type of design for posters that some people have been moving towards. So it's definitely up to how it is in your field and in working with your advisor and determining what kind of poster you would like to have. I like design-based posters because they center your conclusion right in the middle. So if you're walking through a crowded, convention hall and you're looking around at all the posters, you get to see right away that this conclusion is non-invasive, commercially available thermal imaging identifies adverse cardiac remodeling in mice. It's easy to understand, it's very clear, and then that way, if someone's interested in those findings and how someone got to those findings, they could go in, look at this poster, they're able to look at the diagram here, the different figures, they have photos, and you could read more about it. And the format of your poster definitely varies, or it varies based on your goals and your audience. So going back to your 4 quadrants that you made earlier, it definitely depends on what you're trying to communicate and who you're communicating it to. So you don't necessarily have to pick one right now. You don't have to say, I'm going with design-based for the rest of my life and I cannot go back to a traditional poster. You're more than able to kind of consider the goals of your poster, consider who you're talking to, and what the setting is like in order to determine what kind of poster you want to make. Regardless, making posters prepares you to communicate with people inside and outside of your field. So maybe if you're communicating to community members, maybe a design-based poster would be nice because you see a bunch of different colors, there's a lot of photos, it's really just centering your vision on the design of the poster. Versus on a traditional poster, you're really just translating more information. It's more for scientific conferences, research-based, in terms of that traditional sense of sharing information. Tina, do you have anything to add for this slide here?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with everything Nicole said. Traditional posters adhere to a very old structure in academia about how we communicate the work that we're doing, the research that we engage in. And it's normally made in very tiny print. And that's of usefulness to other experts in our field. As you all become experts in your respective areas and topics, sometimes you'll need a lot more verbiage to be able to communicate very clearly what this means. And design-based posters often more efficiently reach community members. Think of it like, oh, I read a tweet, and there it is. And if I want more, I can dig more into that if I wanted to. But otherwise, I learned that little snippet and I can move on with my life. I would hazard anyone to choose either of these without talking with their advisor or mentors first. I don't know about all of your fields, and I'd be interested in knowing, like, I see a lot of people in participants in this room right now, what your fields are. Some fields are much more open. If you're in a communication-based field or humanities-based field, design-based posters might be new, but kind of accepted. If you're in a science if you're in a hard science, traditional posters reign supreme, and you'll get a lot of pushback from your mentors and even people who are running the conferences about doing anything except for a very traditional poster. So make sure that you're reading the field, which is why we have these quadrants, right? Like at the end of the day, especially as new researchers, you get to decide, like, how much pushback do I want if I go this new cool way versus a very traditional old way that people have been doing for dozens of years. I hope that makes sense, right? Like, it's always a negotiation about who you want to be and how you're going to present yourself to the field.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so now we get to the organizational patterns of your poster. So these are the key sections that no matter the format you choose, you should be including on your poster. So similar to a research proposal or a research paper, you're going to have these different components. So title, 100% always include a title on your poster. At this point, you should also include authors and department affiliations. So right underneath your title, you're going to have what department you're from, what department your advisor's from, and any other authors and their affiliations. Logos is something that I've personally find myself forgetting a lot of times, and that's something that people normally do forget. And it's a nice addition to have, especially if you've been funded by a specific agency or anything like that. You can include that funding agency on your poster. If you're coming from the College of Education, for example, on my posters, I include the transparency logo of the College of Education right at top. So you can do that for the department that you're in or your advisor's in, or if you're partnering with a different department, then you could include that as well. If you're traveling maybe out of state and you're one of the only UNLV people there, you could definitely throw up a UNLV logo there as well, letting people know that you come from University of Nevada, Las Vegas. For your abstract, so this is going to be a quick summary of your entire piece of work. It's often similar to whatever you submitted to the conference in the first place. So it's going to be like an overview of here's what I did, here's what I found, here's why it's important. And it's basically just a quick summary, no more than a paragraph, sometimes broken up into bullet points if you want to, but normally I just have a little paragraph right at the top left-hand side of my poster. For your introduction, this will be your topic and the literature that guides your thinking. So this would include any frameworks that you have, as well as your research questions. So this is where you're going to have your introduction. For your procedures and methods, you'll have quant and qualitative procedures, either both or one of the other, that you followed to obtain your data. Make sure to include at least some of those procedures, whether that be in photos, whether that's in a description or a list, as well as defining your data set. So anything to visualize your data is always really helpful. Whether that's, presenting like a pie chart or a bar graph, whether that's presenting any tables, if you have like the mean, median, and mode of a statistical analysis, anything like that, you could definitely include on your poster as well. You're going to be including analysis and findings. So the methods that you use to develop findings and the findings themselves. So these are often framed by your research questions. you will also have citations and or a QR code. So what people have been doing recently is generating QR codes for their research posters that essentially link you to like either a Google Doc or a Google Drive folder, where you can, it's a list of your citations or it's a list for more information. So people can come up to your poster and they say, hey, this is like really great. Where can I get more info about this? You could definitely scan it and then that way be transported to a different page and then people could find out all about your research. So I included a QR code on one of my posters for a conference that I did last February, which is weird because COVID, that was like, it feels like such a long time ago, but it was just last February. And basically I had a link to lesson plans online. So teachers were able to come up to my poster, scan the QR code, and then have access to the lesson plans way after viewing my poster. So that's something really neat that you can include, and it helps people kind of find out more about your work. In terms of acknowledgements, so this is something that you should include on your poster if you've been funded by any agencies. Maybe if you've had assistance from other professors that aren't necessarily listed on your author list, they would go down in acknowledgements as well. So a lot of times if you have someone assisting with data analysis or something like that, but not at the level of authorship, you should provide them an acknowledgement as well. Dr. Vo, do you have anything to add on this? I saw a couple things in the chat, which brings up a really good point.
Oh, no. Laura just pointed out that it may be her field, maybe their field is a little anti-abstract, and that's perfectly fine. All of these are take them or leave them. Sometimes the abstract and the introduction are combined. Sometimes you don't do citations, you just do the QR code. Mm-hmm. I will make a note that if you list someone, so in the next slide that you're going to see, you'll see an example of a poster that Nicole did. Oh, here we go. Everyone in that title, so Nicole and my names are listed on this poster. Everyone in that line should get to review and have say on your poster. They might not give you anything, but as a common courtesy, I realize a lot of these like norms of academia are not explicit, but if you put someone up there, it's not because of a kindness, it's not because like, oh, so-and-so is on my committee, or so-and-so was part of my prospectus, or da-da-da. Authorship is always a conversation on everything in academia. And so sometimes they'll be like, oh, you're good, I don't need to look at it, I trust you, and that's fine, right? Like you have that approval. But anyone you list as an author should have some authority to make changes or to give you feedback, or at least give you an option like, hey, have you thought about this versus this? So when, Nicole, if you'll go back a slide, please. That's where you'll get a lot of the feedback on each of these. Some people are really anti-findings and really pro-conclusions because that might include your findings and your implications. You never know where people's like weird feelings are about specific words, but in academia, in our research, words get very nuanced. So it's just one of those considerations. Okay, next slide, please, friend.
Perfect.
Just to keep in your head as you move forward with any of these sections. All right, friends. We have a small activity for you. You don't have to type anything just yet, but be prepared. Take a minute and just make sure that you understand each of these ideas well enough to find them in a poster. Okay? Maybe they're there, maybe they're not there. Including and not including these things say something about you, as does your design. So for a moment, I'd like to challenge you, and you can whisper, you can chat in the box, you can just think about it and ruminate it on it yourself. If you didn't know Nicole, who is wonderful and generous and here with us today, running this entire like presentation, What would this poster tell you about her? What might this work value? Nicole F says a method section. Yes, she dedicated a lot of time to the method section, right? You can see that by the space that's given. So if that was the case, then maybe someone coming up to this might give more feedback on the method section. Does that make sense? Because that's what they have to work with you in. Here's something I would love if, everyone could write a couple sentences in chat about. What would you change? And you will not hurt Nicole's feelings. Part of a hard science,
I won't be offended. Yeah.
is to take critique and know, like, as soon as it's done, I could have done that better. You still get to be proud of yourself. Like, be proud that you put together a great poster. But in education, we're always taught, and especially in hard sciences, when you walk away from something, I could have done that better. What would you have liked to see on this poster, or what would you change? There are no wrong answers here.
What definitely helped me create better posters was being able to look at examples and then critique them. So this is definitely, it helps in creating your own and determining like what you specifically want to value in your work and what you want to share.
Alicia, can you say more about the test session? Would you want to do more about that? Do less with that? Nicole F likes the colors and wonders why the finding sections are so small. That's a really great critique everyone who passed this poster would probably think.
Mm-hmm.
And the implication is that she might not have very many findings right now, and that's okay. Right? The findings are shorter than the introduction, absolutely, right? Like, and if you don't love that, make sure that you have enough findings. But you never know when your advisor is like, you should probably go to this poster thing. Can you whip one up? And you have no, it's just one of those. Laura's tells us this might be a reflection of my field, but I really look for the conclusions. What did you learn from your research? What do you want the reader to learn? Yep. More detailed. It's really obvious that this poster is heavily based on the front matter. And that more time will be spent. And this is one of those things. If you're future considerations, that would be a great section to have. And if you're standing at your poster, you get to address all of these things. And that's part of the post-it note, right? Like if you're doing this in person versus if you're leaving this somewhere. Nicole was actually were you? You got to do a video.
Oh, I was in person for this one. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I did get to address a lot of the comments about the findings, and that's specifically because I had just started this project. Like I had I had collected my data, but I hadn't analyzed any of it yet, but I really wanted to present it. So in terms of being in a master's program, you kind of have to hit a lot of the conferences, even if you're not necessarily done with your work yet. So that's totally okay. I did get a little bit of flack for it in terms of, okay, well, what are your findings right now? And all that I had to tell people was, well, actually, I'm still in the data analysis phase. Our preliminary findings suggest this. So being able to kind of expand upon that, people are generally forgiving when you tell them that. A lot of people understand that you are a graduate student, so sometimes you might not have a completed project that you're presenting. But if you're going to a large conference and it's, people are presenting like entire papers, then at that point, it's usually like a project that you're able to present the findings of as well. So it definitely depends on where you're going, who you're presenting to, and what you want to get out of it as well.
Nicole, can you remind me who the audience was for this?
Yeah, so this was at the CARE conference. So this was a majority of, it was psychology, education, and a few other social sciences fields, but more general. So it wasn't like specific to teachers or anything like that. It was a more general audience, but academic nonetheless.
So if I remember correctly, this is more for, like, she was also looking for feedback at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like, this is a different structure if you're helping someone comment on your method section, if they have advice for how you're doing or what you can do with this data. And that's why it's really important to remember who your audience is and what your goals are. I think everyone, especially in chat, has made some really nice points about like what you've noticed, because what you've noticed is what your field will notice too. I know some of you are just beginning your journeys, some of you might be on the middle or near the end, and you have a better sense of what the field wants. And this is just one example of how different fields can want different things. I would always highly recommend, if you can get someone outside of your, even if it's a very field specific conference, inviting a close friend in a different department would always help make your posters better. Okay. I think this is good. Everyone's, yeah, great. Thank you for participating, friends. I know it's a lot. Oh, okay. So I think this is just generally, and again, please take this with a grain of salt, that these 4 things should influence what you're deciding to present. Nicole, I added that image while you weren't looking.
I love it. I was just laughing at it. Fonts do matter.
It's just like 4 basic points. Like if you're on this is for the beginners among you. If you're at the very beginning of your trajectory and you're about to go out there in a poster, you get 2 to 3 fonts and sizes max. And this is where I generally think that they'll fall out. Like you get one size for your headings, one size for your text, and one size for emphasis. And that could be like figureheads, table heads, or quote if you're using quotes. This is to not confuse the viewers. I would say 3 font sizes. It might just be 2 fonts at most. And try to keep them similar. Some have feet, some don't have feet. I hear that there's a new dyslexic font that helps like people who have dyslexia read things better or more easily. I mean, I haven't investigated that, but it might be worth looking into. The second thing you should consider is symmetric versus asymmetric layouts and ordering. Generally, people really like symmetric layouts. They're very appealing. You'll notice even this slide, it's a slide, not a poster. Or even back, Nicole, you don't have to go there, but thinking back to Nicole's purple poster, it had 4 columns and it was very clear to like how they all kind of just fit together. When you break that symmetric pattern is where you draw the eye. Asymmetric ones are useful even in the design base, right? Like you have one center post and it draws your eye there, but it's also very pleasing because there were 2 runners on either side. But let's say like one side is heavier than another. That tells people, oh, this side isn't important to pay attention over here, right? Like everyone seemed to notice where Nicole spent her time. It was in her data. So those asymmetric things are things that humans just pick up on. Alignment and space. Okay. Again, this is real simple things, and if you know this, you can ignore it. English speakers read from left to right, top to bottom. That means the things we give the most importance to, unless you as a designer think about reordering this, will be in that top right-hand corner. The same for centering. Anything that is not left justified immediately gets attention. So make sure that you're picking those titles very clearly. The ones we listed are very generic. Your field might use something different. Also, just consistency. Again, having those columns vertically or horizontally really lead the eye and tell people where they're looking. If you're really, really talented, you're able to use the rule of thirds. Whenever you look at a screen, if you divide it into 1/3 and 2/3 and draw lines, the intersection of those lines vertically and horizontally create a focal point. So that's where you want to put them, like your most important finding, or where you want to create like areas of interest on your poster. And we should always pay attention to things like accessibility. Color contrasts in terms of color blindness, absolutely a thing to consider. I actually always do everything in grayscale before I put color on top of it to make sure it's understandable and accessible to people who might not be able to see the color. Also, there's new studies being done on how people on the who are autistic interpret and engage with text. Those are entire manuals of like ADA compliance, but just something to consider if your field is like adjacent to those areas. But even if it's not, like if we can do a small thing like use more literal language or keep our text to a minimum, because we know like we're presenting to those audiences, always an important thing. So these are just general design principles for you to keep in mind when you're creating a poster, but it will come in time. Like, pick one of these bullets and just like, that's what I will consider this time. Whatever comes, comes. And a new bullet every time you make a new poster. You'll eventually get to all of them. Okay. I'm sorry.
Perfect. Okay. We're also going to cover answering questions and how to speak outside of your field. So this is something that I actually really enjoy doing, and it comes a lot from interdisciplinary work as well. So in considering your audience and your goals, what information do you want to disseminate? Who are you interested in speaking with and networking with? So say, for example, you really want feedback on data. You should be including more data on your poster. And then once people come up and talk to you about it, a lot of times, if they're well versed in it, they'll ask more questions. So those are the types of people where, say, if you want feedback from a specific field of study or individual, and they're talking to you about your poster, continue to engage. It's totally fine to have conversations around your poster. It's actually really, really helpful in terms of networking with other researchers and meeting community members as well. In terms of audience questions, be able to answer questions about the procedures and the work that you specifically did. So one of the most frequently asked questions that I've ever gotten at a conference is, okay, what was your specific role in this study? So a lot of times people will be presenting like entire data sets or things like that, whether that's from a lab or from, another graduate student, or a professor was working on something and you had like a small portion of the project. That's totally normal and people understand that. Just be able to talk about that. So know your own procedures, know the work that you specifically did. Because if it's on your poster, people are going to assume that you know what it is. So just being able to know more of your background, your literature, things like that as well. And then being able to walk people through your process as well is really important. So a lot of times people would read the poster and then be like, oh, this is great. Tell me more about it. So being able to have like an elevator speech. Oh, perfect. Yes, being able to have kind of a quick summary of what your work is, in terms of someone who, if they are standing there for 10 minutes and they're judging your poster, you should have about like an 8-minute speech and then leave some time for questions. If the posters aren't being judged or if people are just talking to you about it, prepare like a quick tidbit of information that you can give to them. And then if they want to know more about it, they can read more about it. They could ask you questions. There's lots of different ways for people to expand upon what you're telling them. Make sure to review your literature and your background info. A lot of times, if you're at a conference that's like research specific to your field, people will know a lot of the literature that goes into your work. So kind of just being aware of what you're presenting and just general frameworks and things like that you'll learn in your classes and things, where if people get really specific, then chances are you'll at least know what they're talking about. However, if you don't know the answer to a question, that's also okay. I've had this happen to me a few times, where they've asked me a question and I have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. That's totally fine too. You can let them know that it's something that you'll consider in the future. So if someone will be like, oh, Nicole, have you considered, the implications of doing these tests at UCAN? And I'm like, oh, that's actually a really great point. I'll take that into consideration. I haven't thought about it yet. So just kind of like, not necessarily passing it off, but being able to kind of talk about that, and let them know that you don't know that yet, but that's okay. Most importantly, though, you should have an idea of the future directions of your research. This is oftentimes the part that's really, really exciting for people, myself included. So both for the person researching as well as the person asking about it. We all want to know about where your research is going. Like, what's the big picture? Why is this important to you? Why is this important to the community? Being able to talk about that and to talk about where your research will go is really important in terms of feedback. Because if you tell people what you're planning, if you're able to tell people like, this is something that I'm interested in and I want to bring it in this direction, chances are they'll be able to provide you feedback that would be able to assist you in further developing your project, further developing your research, or just giving you general advice. This is an important note about advice though. I've learned that sometimes you will get pieces of advice from individuals at your poster that you don't necessarily want to take into consideration. That's okay. Review that with your advisor though. So it's always really, really important to write down the feedback that people have provided you. And then after that, you could review that with your advisor and say, hey, these are the considerations that people have said. Because sometimes you might know your work a lot better than someone walking up to your poster. And that's okay. Like you can say, I really appreciate that. Thank you. And then toss it aside. Or if you get something that you really like and that your advisor agrees with as well, it might bring up a totally new perspective that you didn't even think about before. And that's something that you could take into consideration as well. So being able to answer those questions, a lot of times people, it creates anxiety or kind of stress of like, oh my gosh, people, are going to ask me questions about the work and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm here to tell you that you do know what you're doing and that a lot of people feel like that as well. So you're totally fine. You're going to be okay. In terms of speaking outside of your field, I think it's easiest to talk to people that you know, whether that's friends or family, and see if you can share your information with them without them being confused by what you're saying. So the best way to explain it is like, think about you're a teacher and you have elementary students that you're trying to explain science to. If you're working with like a general population, and say it's just like a community event, and most of the people there might not know about science. So you're going to want to break things down in a way where you can explain it to people who might not have any background in that. So just being able to kind of break down what you're doing into more simple terms is really, really helpful for just general audiences as well. And that also works for speaking outside of your field. So those are kind of tips and tricks that I've noticed in terms of answering questions and speaking out of your field. Tina, if you have any other suggestions oh, I love this. Your mom kind of understands what you do. If you'd love to talk about that, I think, yeah.
No, I think that there's so much good work happening in the world, and all of you are a part of it. if you've chosen to go down a graduate career, then you are striving to add a little piece of knowledge into the world, which is amazing. Being able to communicate that clearly and well to someone not in your field, I think becomes really important. Plus, it adds to the idea of like the networks that we have that support us outside of grad school, right? Like if you can communicate like even one tiny iota, that would be useful. So I highly recommend you talking to a sibling, a guardian, a parent, a next door neighbor, who of course, all things considered, masked and social distance, right? What do you think about this idea? And then you just say your research. Practice as much as you can in as many low stakes environments as you can, right? With people that will love you no matter what and who don't mind when you are confusing to them, but are honest enough with you to say, no, what, no, what, again and again until you can get it right. Because again, you value your work and your advisor values your work. I want the people around you to also be able to value your work. And part of that comes with being able to create these small little snippets of understandable grain size for people who are important to you.
Perfect. So that is the end of our presentation. We have our contact information here, so you're more than welcome to email either of us if you have any questions or kind of just need guidance or, general questions about posters, or just want to say hi. I'm more than happy to definitely talk to people about their posters or anything like that as well. So I'm going to close out of that. And then I think we have a few minutes for questions if anyone has any questions.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Nicole and Dr. Vo. This has been really great, not only for new graduate students, that this is maybe their first kind of sneak peek into, hey, what do I need to know in research poster design? But even I can speak for myself. I'm near the end of my program, and this has been a really great reminder, but also like how I can refine my poster design approach. It's been really awesome. I'll wait a sec to see if there's any questions coming in. I did get a couple directly chatted to me. Maybe I'll ask one of those to get us started.
I will make note that it took me, like, I had a job before I realized that every presentation I do should be feeding towards a publication.
Mm.
And it wasn't until my final year in grad school that I realized I had trained all of this time to become a writer and a communicator. Because that's what you do if you're an academic. In the hard sciences, if you choose to be an academic rather than a research scientist, you're choosing that you are a communicator and a knowledge builder in that sort of way, rather than working in a lab and publishing lab report after lab report. In education, instead of teaching and working with kids, you're honestly just dedicating yourself to becoming a writer. And while teaching still becomes part of, your life as an academic, becoming a writer should become central to everything, because it's how you get tenure, it's how you get hired. It's those weird metrics. So I don't know how many of you have like academia as your sites for grad school or after getting your PhD, but it's something to note and realize. Sorry, that was very tangential to the poster design process.
No, it does go hand in hand for sure, though, because your publications go hand in hand with presenting your research, right? Just one may be more challenging for some folks than the other. I did want to at least squeeze in this question. It's super timely and relevant. Since meetings and events have gone virtual, how do poster designs shift into the virtual space? Any recommendations for poster creation online? What are some different tips that you may have specifically for virtual poster designs and presenting those virtually?
Tina, if you want to take this one, you've navigated that space a lot.
I love this question. I don't know who asked it, but I love this question. So I'm I'd consider myself STEM, and so I'm science first, and my second cognate is technology. I think that virtual poster presentations offer a lot, as well as you lose that interaction. We've lost a lot of networking in all of this. I would highly recommend putting your face on virtual posters just so they can see you, because someday we'll be on the other side of this, and someday you will be looking for jobs and networking, and people should recognize you. But again, that's between you and your advisor. I would highly recommend adding hyperlinks, many more hyperlinks to your poster, to take advantage of these virtual settings. The QR code, always very useful, but if instead now we can put a hyperlink to all of our information and resources lists with Google Docs. I would ask, here's the thing, so many different conferences are going about posters in different ways. Nowadays, I've been to 2 conferences which are set it and forget it, which means that you don't get to be next to your poster during that time, but there's a Q&A after. So you might put your poster out a day or 2 early, and then you'll enter a room with other poster people, and people will come ask you questions. Understanding the format of how these posters are going to be presented is really key. Did that cover the things? I can go on forever about this, but
Oh no, totally.
the favorite ones I've seen are where they allow, like, it's almost like a 3-minute thesis-esque format where you get to put up your poster and then you get a 3-minute video just like talking about your poster, and then they can ask you questions later. But it depends on what conferences are going to look like for you.
So another question, I think we have time at least for one more. Are there any colors that are better for different kinds of posters? I know that there was conversation about being mindful of autistic audience members, inciting certain things. But I was wondering if there are colors or color combinations that we should lean toward, and other colors that maybe we should stay away from.
Yes. So there's actually a ton of fantastic resources online where I've just Googled like good research poster colors for accessibility. So something that you should stay away from is like a red-green contrast, because a lot of times people with red-green colorblind, the rods and cones aren't able to process that contrast color, which leads to everything looking washed out. So nothing that kind of blends like that. What Tina said in terms of starting off in grayscale, that's actually super helpful, because then you know for sure everyone will be able to see your basically all of the writing that you want on your poster. And then you can add splashes of colors that don't necessarily interact with that writing. So basically you just don't want to have like a green background and then red text over the green. That's kind of hard on the eyes for people with color blindness and also without color blindness as well. And then Tina, if you want to add anything.
I will say I'm very bad at colors. So my go-to is I get black, white, gray, and one color of my choice. Some friends are very like, you can do the ombre scale up and down. Any single color is also their choice. But these are like very base level. I've never moved past this because I haven't needed to. But if you're thinking about this, you probably have more expertise in color than I do.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your time, your expertise, and your excitement around research poster design. And just really want to thank you for your time. Thank you to all the participants for joining us. I did share in the chat a feedback survey. If you could please take a few minutes, it's really quick. It would mean so much to us and really help us improve the workshops that we are providing for our Grad Rebel community. Thank you again, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, everyone.